Time again for another installment of The Basics, and on today's show I want to talk about the pros and cons of using non-aligned in the game. And I'm not so much talking about personnel, even though I'll get into that, but this mainly takes into account using non-aligned as an affiliation alone, ships, missions, cards, things like that. So let's get started, shall we? Now, as someone who has built many strictly non-aligned decks over the years, I can tell you it's one of the harder decks to put together in terms of any one affiliation because there's a lot more thinking involved when you're using non-aligned as its own deck. It's not like you're just shoving a few personnel or a couple ships or extra cards or even a mission here and there in an already constructed deck. You are taking non-aligned and making it its own complete deck. One of the main problems being ships. There are a lot of crummy ships exclusive to the non-aligned affiliation. You have to know which ones to choose, such as combat vessel, Darmok, Husnock ship, even though its range is terrible at 6. The mercenary ship is your really good all-around ship. And the Zeppelite freighter, which has an awesome range, but its weapons are garbage. In this case, I would recommend using one or two Husnock ships, a combat vessel, and a mercenary, or a Husnock, a Darmok, and a Zeppelite. Don't use a lot of the smaller ships. They are very crummy, or you could use a Uridian shuttle if you really need to get down to a planet without using transporters or doing anything like that, but the majority of non-aligned ships are quite terrible. Unless, of course, you get into some of the Delta Quadrant ships, they're not bad. But I'm primarily speaking Alpha Quadrant here. Doorways are very important to a strictly non-aligned deck. You want to use, for example, the Alternate Universe door, a Davidian door, several of the space-time portal doors. You're going to have a lot of good personnel with the Alternate Universe icon that you're going to want to bring out. It's my experience that using a strictly non-aligned deck, you're going to use about 50% more doorways in that deck to get a lot of your cards out. Missions. There's not a lot of missions that are strictly non-aligned, such as the Quaylor 2 Rendezvous or Contain It. This is where I suggest using missions that any away team or any crew may attempt. They come in handy here, but beware of a lot of the attribute requirements. You don't see a lot of geology and science in non-aligned. Engineer, yes, you can pick up a lot of those. Things like Quaylor 2 is useful mainly because Treachery plus Greed or Amory, very easy mission. It's not universal, unfortunately, but it is what it is. Or you can do something like Establish Relations, even Geological Survey, but again, it calls into science, geology, and all that wonderful thing. So it's a bit harder. In terms of useful cards, there are many. You would use a lot of the same power cards that you would in, say, a Federation or Klingon deck, but what I would recommend is at least 2 copies of the Wormhole Interrupt that could get you out of a jam, and especially multiple copies of either Full Planet Scan or Scan. The reason for this is because you're playing with a non-aligned deck and your attributes aren't as many as some of the other affiliations in terms of core personnel. You're going to want to glance at the Dilemma and Artifact cards that are located under a mission. And these cards can let you do that for up to 20 seconds. And that could come in handy when you're trying to complete your missions. Finally, in a non-aligned deck, one of the most useful cards, and the more of these you have the better, is Rogue Borg Mercenaries. You've heard me talk about this on previous shows. You can use them in other decks like a Federation or a Romulan or other deck or even Cardassian, but they work very well in a non-aligned deck. They give you that much needed attack power on a planet or beamed onto an opponent's ship right when you need it to keep him distracted. And if it's one thing you need to do when you're playing as a strict non-aligned deck is you have to make sure your opponent is kept busy. That will give you extra time to score points from missions. Now, that all being said, you also have to be aware that you're going to run into issues with a non-aligned deck doing a variety of things, a couple of which are what I've laid out earlier in this episode. And it's not as cut and dry as, say, a Federation or even a Borg deck. That's why you have to have cards like Rogue Borg and extra wormholes and whatnot. You're going to run into problems because of the varied skill sets that your personnel have and the limitations of the ship. You might want to try using shield enhancements like nutational shields or metaphasic shields to help get you out of a jam, but I've lost more than I've won with a strictly non-aligned deck. You're not going to achieve a total amount of success with it. You are going to maybe come out 50-50. It's just the way it is. It's the nature of the beast when using non-aligned alone. That's all for today. Have a great day, everybody.